We're often expected to be positive and upbeat no matter what's going on in our lives. At the very least, we generally feel compelled to put on a happy face for the world. Yet in real life, it's not always easy, or in truth, even natural, to be positive all the time. And for those who face daily challenges such as discrimination, low self worth, isolation, a lack of support, or mental health issues, life can feel very lonely, dark, and bleak. Although there's no simple cure for these challenging issues, a daily practice of healthy affirmations can truly help foster self esteem, empowerment, and a sense of belonging. Today, we'll focus on this listener's real life question. I'm gay but haven't come out. I live in a small town and pretty much know my family and friends would reject me if they knew. I feel depressed and lonely most of the time. I dream about escaping and moving to a bigger city where I think I'd be accepted, but that'd be a big step. How can I stay positive until I get the courage to leave? And with that question as the focus of today's episode, I'm Dr. Carla Marie Manley, and this is Imperfect Love.
Welcome to Imperfect Love with Dr. Carla Marie Manley, psychologist, author, and relationship expert. I'm here to help unravel mysteries and misconceptions about love, relationships, and mental health issues, plus everything in between. Love is complicated, people are not perfect, and relationships surely can be tough. Together, we'll navigate this messy, imperfect space of real life.
Please note, as this episode contains sensitive information, listener discretion is advised. If you need support, please see the special links in the show notes. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest, Jess Vosseteig, who will be sharing their expertise on the power of affirmations. Jess's work focuses on inclusivity, empowerment, and creating conversations surrounding feminism and the queer community. As a writer and illustrator, Jess has partnered with many top brands, including Facebook Meta, Lush, Ulta Beauty, and Ms. Foundation for Women. Jess, I am so delighted to have you with us today. Thank you so much for joining. Before we launch into the podcast, can you tell our listeners just a little bit about what makes you you?
Sure. That's a very open question. Yeah, I'm an illustrator and author, and I live in Colorado. As you said, my work kind of focuses on the queer community, and that's kind of where most of my inspiration comes from. And I just do freelance art. So I work with a bunch of brands and do that full time right now.
And you also specialize, well, I guess this gets us into the topic of the day, but you also specialize in affirmations and the power of affirmations. And you're such a good fit for the question of the day. And I happen to have right here a copy of your beautiful book. For those of you who are watching the video, you can see it. It's absolutely beautiful. It's Affirmations for Queer People, 100 plus positive messages to affirm, empower, and inspire. And one of the many things I love about your book is that pretty much anyone can pick the book up and just be filled. Not only are your illustrations gorgeous and empowering and heartwarming, but also I'm just going to close my eyes and open it to a certain page. And here we go. I honor the intersection of my identities. And we all have different identities. And so that's a really beautiful one. Here's another one. Ah, I am worthy of healthy and fulfilling relationships. And the picture is just so beautiful. For those of you who can't see it, it is a couple in just this like warm hug. And who doesn't need a hug? And so when we look at not only your drawings, but the words that you've paired them with, in a world where we often feel, regardless of our sexual orientation or gender identity, we often feel lonely, disenfranchised, disempowered. Um, how do you see affirmations working to boost, before we really focus on this listener's question, which is a really important question, so many layers to it. But how do you think for our general population, before we get more specific, how can people in general benefit from the power of affirmations?
Yeah, I think affirmations can be good for everyone, not just specifically subsets of the community, because everybody needs empowerment that they give themselves. Because I mean, the world is always like pushing back on us and telling us things that we don't want to hear sometimes. And it's, complicated. And so I think our heads get a little scrambled and we get stuck in this like cycle of negativity in our own brains a lot of the time. I know I especially struggle with that, with like anxious thoughts just kind of like spiraling into like negative patterns. And I think affirmations are a really good way to like kind of stop that spiral in its tracks and kind of reframe your thinking and push it into a more positive space than a negative one. So I think anybody can benefit from that and use that in their daily life. Everybody kind of experiences negativity and negative thoughts in their own brain. So if you just replace it with a positive one and repeat that to yourself, it'll become a little bit easier.
It sounds to me as if you're talking in an interesting way about rewiring your brain.
Hmm.
So, from not only a neuro-linguistic level, but a neuropsychological level, that broader umbrella, the more we think positive thoughts about the self or other people, but the more we have these wonderful affirmations that we maybe start our day with, give ourselves a dose of them at lunch and a dose, at dinner, and then a dose as we're going to bed. Because whatever we fill our brains with, fill our minds with, fill our body with, be it good or not so good, it's going to affect us. And so, what I'm hearing you say is, if we use the power of affirmations to remind ourselves that we are worthy, for one of the pieces that I picked, that we are worthy of healthy relationships, just something that basic. If we're in a relationship that's not healthy, whatever the type of relationship it is, a simple affirmation like that, seemingly simple, can really help us remember, wait a minute, I deserve a healthy relationship, not this one that is really draining and where this person's demeaning me or not supporting me. So I really appreciate the power of affirmations. Now, question for you, do you practice affirmations?
Yeah, I'm trying to use them more now, actually, now that like I've kind of realized the impact that they can have on you. So it's definitely like a practice to work on, and just like anything, the more you practice, the easier it gets. So for me, I've been kind of trying to like practice them when I'm in that anxious spiral that I was kind of talking about.
Mhm.
So when I'm just stuck in that negative spiraling down negative thoughts, I just kind of try to remind myself of a positive affirmation in those moments.
So let's lean into the piece about the spiral of negative thoughts. I really like starting there. In my fourth book, The Joy of Imperfect Love, I talk about how our feelings, our thoughts, our mindset, our energy, and our actions blend together. So it starts with a feeling that creates a thought, that creates a mindset, that creates our energy, and then out comes our actions. And when we look at the power of affirmations, if the feeling comes up, as you were saying, the anxious spiral, so we're feeling anxious, then the thoughts come up that might be, I'm not safe, I'm not lovable, I'm not worthy. And then comes the mindset of, oh, nobody loves me. I'm not lovable. And we get a little more global with it. And then our energy kind of gets dark and gloomy. And then our actions, we tend to retract, or we tend to get angry, or go down that doom scrolling or whatever we're doing. And so I'm hearing you say, if I got it right, that you see the power of affirmations as coming in the thoughts. So we get this feeling, the anxiety, the sadness, whatever it is, um, maybe feeling isolated, whatever feelings popping up. And then you say, oh, I'm going to mindfully. Use this specific affirmation. And that's one thing I love about your book, because let's say I'm headed into an anxious spiral. I can open up your book. I'll do it again. Just pop open a page and say, find one. I can find support in shared experiences with others. Or the one on the opposite page, I bring a new perspective to the world. I am a force of change. Here's another one. I am capable of achieving greatness. And simply by reading one of them, because sometimes when we're in that anxious spiral, we may not have words that can help prop us up or get us settled. We may actually really want to have a book handy or to be able to open and maybe leaf through pages till we find one that seems like, oh, this resonates with me, or I can lean into this. So if we've captured it at the feeling and then the thought level, now we can shift our thoughts. And when we shift our thoughts, now we've changed our mindset, our energy, our actions, and thus we tend to have a much better hour or day, sometimes week. Is that how you are seeing this work?
Yeah, definitely. I think you captured that perfectly, actually.
And so let's look in, if we just move to the listener's question of the day. And I get, so many questions, some of them similar, some not, and I try and match them up with the right expert. And this one seems a perfect pairing for your expertise, because most of us have suffered some form of discrimination or lack of inclusivity or disempowerment. Yet for those in the queer community, especially if they don't have support, and this individual sounds very unsupported, it is a different kind of aloneness. It is a different type of being disenfranchised. And I think it's one of the reasons that there is such a high rate of mental health issues, suicidality, suicide in the queer community, and certainly in certain segments of it, because it can be very isolating
Mhm.
to be walking out into the world or wanting to walk out in the world and being afraid of being judged, discriminated against, not seen, not even given space. So, what do you think that affirmations can do to combat that?
Yeah, I feel like it's tough for this listener specifically. It sounds like they don't have a super good support system. So I think in those moments where you don't have someone to go to like be in community with and help you get through something, you have to kind of look to yourself in those moments. And that's especially hard when you're feeling so othered and put down by society because you're just getting all this negativity pushed at you constantly. So it'd be hard to believe that, you are valid and you should have space in the world if that's all you're hearing and you have no one to tell you otherwise. So in those moments, I think you have to tell yourself. And that's where the affirmations come into play for me, I think, is being able to tell yourself positive things instead of negative things and kind of create your own mental environment that's a little bit safer, I guess.
That's really beautifully put and perfectly put, because sometimes that is the only safe space that
Right.
someone has, is their mental environment. And whether for this individual or someone else who is feeling very alone and isolated, and it is very sad, but it is very true that sometimes until we can get the strength or the resources. It's one thing to say, yes, I'll move to a bigger city or another city and find people there, but that can feel like a Herculean act. Not only is it, I remember I was actually talking to my husband about it this morning. I went to a seminar because I love growing myself not only as a clinician, but as a human being. And I went to a seminar on working with the queer community. And I remember the speaker was this wonderful trans woman who was talking about growing up in Mexico. And she knew very early on that she was trans. I mean, that this life, and her family kicked her out. And then she ended up, and she speaks all around the world on this. And then she went to Los Angeles and had a very difficult time there. Very, very sad story. Lots of sad stories. And then she finally found her way to San Francisco, found her community, went through a great deal of hardship. And now, as an openly trans woman, she goes around the world speaking and empowering and educating people like me, which is just phenomenal. But I remember when I was listening to her, the pain I could still feel in her, but I'm very sensitive, so of course I'm picking up her pain, and but also the sense of anyone who has ever felt disenfranchised or not wanted or not part of a group, and sometimes we can even remember that from kindergarten or grade school, feeling like we have been othered. I like your use of that term. It can resonate. Most people can find a time where they felt othered. Yet, for most of us, that's a time. It's a time, an experience, maybe a year in school or a couple months in school. But for people in the queer community, like this individual, it was for the one I'm talking about, who's the speaker. It was for most of her life. There was no reprieve from it. There was no going home from it. And so I think it's so important not to go too far from the power of affirmations, but to realize that sometimes that mental space, and that's why I'm thinking about this, the individual who was the speaker, she clearly, that was all she had at times, was her mental space of knowing this is who I am and I'm going to keep trudging through life. And that's a pretty lonely, and she encountered a lot of abuse of all types along the way. And what courage. And so in looking at your book, reading your book, you know, being nourished by your book, I find it such a powerful force because she did not have access. There were no books like that as she was growing up. And so kudos to you and kudos to the listener who wrote in, because in today's world, we might not realize how many marginalized people there are.
Mhm.
So, would your recommendations be for our listeners and people who can see themselves in this listener for using not only the affirmations to create that mental space, but then maybe thinking about resources, using the affirmations as a pathway to greater resources? Do you know what I'm saying? Is that too
I think I'm
oblique?
I think I'm trying to figure out where you're going with that. I think what are you trying to say, like, how else could they use affirmations to, like sorry, could you just rephrase it?
Well, I was not clear enough. When we look, I'm opening the book again, and there's one that says, "My voice matters." And oh, here's one. I release the weight of societal expectations. I have the right to exist as a queer person. So what I'm saying, we get that in our mind, and so we get some solace there for this individual. And then what I was leaping to is too big of a leap. Then perhaps realize, wait, I have a computer here. I have this right to exist as a queer person. Even if my family or friends might be monitoring my computer or phone use or whatever is happening, is there a way they could go somewhere to a library or in private mode on their phone to Google online support,
Oh, yeah.
to start taking baby steps to find a community where they feel supported? And I think this is the same across all marginalized communities, or all communities where somebody's feeling unsupported and unseen, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's a rape survivor, whether it's a queer person who's feeling isolated and unseen. Sometimes those first steps, once we start getting a little power, because it takes so much courage, so we
Right.
start having the positive word tracks, the positive mindset, and then use that to take that next step, which is getting more support. So in your work, and I really appreciate that you are there to help empower queer people, to help, people who really believe in feminism and moving forward in that direction. What would you say as far as looking for resources, going that next step?
Yeah, I actually have some resources at the end of my book for queer people to look at and kind of dive into. But like generally, the internet exists. So you can really find anything on there. And there's so many things out there nowadays that you can look into and find community in. There's so many like chat forums that you can find people across the globe or across the country and find shared experience with those people. There's like organizations that help lots of kids and adults even, and there's just so many things out there. And it's amazing to see how far we've come with the internet and how we can all kind of come together through that, even when we're isolated in our own communities and our own spaces. So, like specifically for the listener that we're talking about, I think they have big dreams of moving away and finding community in this new big city. And that's like a lovely idea, but it might not be realistic for who knows how long, you know? And some people, it's not realistic ever to like be able to leave their towns. So, the first thing you have to do is, like we said, start with your mental environment, find that empowered feeling, then kind of use that momentum, I think, and try to educate yourself and reach out. And that's kind of where, like, I would say the internet comes into play. I'm sure there's a lot of community events or like forums or meetings to go to that people can find. So then I think branching out into your community, that's helpful. And then from there, you can take it wider. You can spread information on the internet, kind of like how we're doing right now, and educate other people. And like your one example of the trans woman who's a speaker, you could even go speak in communities. And so I think it's just like really starts small with yourself and your mental environment, like we were saying, and then you can branch out into people around you, maybe your local community, and then it can get wider from there. But I think the internet is a really great resource.
I agree. And what I've noticed in working with clients, particularly those who are coming to terms with not being, say, cisgender or really thinking about surgery, trans surgery, whatever they're going through, opening the door by searching on the internet, by going to the doctor's office to talk, about starting to take hormones, it can be that alone can be really terrifying because you're taking that first concrete step. So it sounds as if perhaps the listener is afraid of taking those steps because once you open that door and literally come out of your closet or your bedroom and into the greater world and say, hey, this is who I am, there's not a whole lot of going back from that.
Mhm.
And that can be really scary.
Yeah, for sure. And so I think that's where the affirmations will be helpful for people like the listener, because if you can build up your own mental ability to like feel valid and feel respected with yourself and like build up that courage when you walk out into the world as yourself and you're met with discrimination and people saying all these things to you, you're going to be able to have the capacity to kind of handle that better, I think.
Absolutely. And I know I'm thinking of a particular client whose friends found out about this individual being trans, and this person was blacklisted. And it was really, really difficult. And I can tell you that affirmations were an absolutely, because what we did is we created an affirmation practice, and this individual was able to repeat the mantras every morning, every night. They were posted on the bathroom mirror, they were posted in the closet, they were posted on the refrigerator, because if other people are overtly unaccepting of who you are, it can be really crushing.
Mhm.
And for many people, I found it's especially hard if they don't have familial support. If they have a family, it's one thing to not have a community outside the home, but if you feel as if your family is going to cancel you, so to speak, it's scary.
Mhm.
It's really scary. And so not that, as I said in the lead in, it's not that affirmations are a cure-all, but I am a firm believer that no matter what's going on for us, if we feel good, it's not that we have to be happy, but if we feel positive, because happiness and positivity are two different things. But if we feel positive about who we are, if we feel connected to this is who I am, I have a right to be this person, I am good, I am strong, I am lovable. And those are all important things. And sometimes in childhood, we aren't told those things. Sometimes in childhood, we're told very often, oh, you're broken, oh, you could be better, you're unworthy. And so we take that and we add on the hammer of people not appreciating or you not feeling safe with your own identity, your own sexual orientation or gender identity, it can be really depressing and isolating. So let's go back again, just looping back because I want listeners to appreciate that no matter who you are in this world, that message inside the self, especially if you didn't get good childhood messages, it's a matter of training. It
Mhm.
really is. It's a matter, and in your book, you also add beautiful pictures that add the visual that it's not the binary way we're used to looking at the world. And so for somebody who's exploring their identity, their sexual orientation, it is such a beautiful way of looking, going, "Oh yeah, this is okay. This is beautiful. I see myself in this person. I see myself in that couple," or that's what I would really like. And I think when we add that layer to affirmations, which is why your book is especially beautiful because you could speak them out loud. You could speak them into a mirror. You could share them with a friend if you have a friend. So you're hearing them, you're seeing them, in print, but then you're seeing these gorgeous, colorful visuals. And I noticed that one of them appears to look quite a lot like you.
Yes.
And here it is. Being queer gives me strength. And listeners, if you can see, there's our Jess in this particular picture. It's just a beautiful one. So, Jess, I maybe would have been better to lead with this for those listeners who don't really understand, because the word queer has had various meanings over time, and at one time was really derogatory. And now it's used in a sense that is very powerful, very enlightened, and very welcoming. Could you describe what it means to you to be queer?
Yeah, so like you said already, it had a long history before how it's used today. Originally, I think it meant like strange or peculiar, and that was what that kind of meant to people. And then I think it became a derogatory term towards LGBT people around like maybe the 80s. And then we reclaimed that word after that, and now we use it as kind of an umbrella, like overarching term for people who don't fit into societal norms. People define the term very loosely, and some people say it's like only LGBT people. Some people kind of define it a little more broad than that. But personally, for me, I just use it as an umbrella term for anyone who doesn't really fit into like heteronormative or cisgender norms.
Very beautifully said. And so we can look at, for many people, the idea of a queer community is still a pretty scary thought because they haven't been exposed to it. And I'm really fortunate because part of my work, part of who I am, part of not only who I am, but part of my professional belief is that I continue to grow and evolve. And if we allow ourselves to not be scared of what's unfamiliar, to actually lean into it and say, well, people have different ways of being. It's not going to be, there's no right or wrong here. This is about allowing people the freedom to express who they are,
Mhm.
whether it's their sexual orientation, whether it's their religion, whether it's, any aspect of who they are. We are in a world where I hope that there is much more space for that, where it's no longer, as you said, heteronormative, and it needs to be what society from 100 years ago, quite frankly, thought was okay. I think we can continue to evolve, and I really think that that's a wise step because the more colors there are in the world, the more shades, the more variation, the more beautiful it is. I think a black and white world is a very dull world indeed.
Yeah, I totally agree with you.
And, going back to your book, you definitely use a lot of color. And I'm wondering, Jess, was that intentional rather than
Yeah.
going, yeah?
Yeah, definitely. Um, yeah, all of my illustrations that I do are really bright and positive and colorful. I think color plays a huge role in how we feel. So that's why the bright, positive colors really spoke to me for how I create art, because I love to center it around positivity. So definitely comes into play with the colors.
And if we look at the difference, Jess, between positivity and putting on that happy face for the world, what do you see as the difference?
Yeah, I feel like positivity is a little bit more free form than saying like, "Oh, I'm happy." Because if you're happy, everyone sees that as like, "Oh, you're doing great, you're having a great day, everything in your world is totally fine." But I think being positive is trying your best to just kind of get through whatever you're going through and have a good outlook on it. It doesn't necessarily mean that everything's going great. It just means that you're trying to do your best to get through it.
I love that definition because some people think that being positive, because we talk about toxic positivity.
Mhm.
Toxic positivity is pretending everything is great when it's not and feeling like you need to do that 24/7, which is impossible. And happiness, which is something that is can be quite fleeting. Whereas positivity, I agree with you, it's more of an attitude and an energy. And I see it also as being related to hope.
Mhm.
And going back to our listener's question, anyone who can understand that situation of feeling isolated, disempowered, not able to be yourself, if you have positivity, positive affirmations, positive words, positive snippets to hold to, which is your book is just filled with really meaningful positivity, then it's a way to not lose hope because that is what I've seen happen so often. And it makes me very sad because sometimes people start withering away and start thinking about suicide or really get stuck in anxiety and depression. And if we have positive mantras, positive affirmations, and I think of this very, um, the analogy is not perfect, but I think of this hike I was taking out of the Grand Canyon, and it was extraordinarily hot, and I had never done anything quite like that before, and I kept saying to myself, "I can do this. I can do this. I am strong. I am tough. I can do this." And we can see if you use that as an analogy for a journey that is, I mean, that was a situational journey. This, what our individual is talking about today, is a lifetime journey.
Mhm.
And we can see if a positive affirmation gives us hope to get to the from the bottom of the Grand Canyon, you know, a day's hike up to the top, right?
Mhm.
That if a positive affirmation can keep us going on that sort of journey, then a positive affirmation, if we really embrace it and keep it with us, it could give this individual hope. And
Mhm.
maybe they don't ever leave their community. Maybe they do. Maybe they end up in a big city and live wild and free and however they want to be. But we can see how positive affirmations really make a difference, just like a negative. We can call it a negative affirmation because affirmation can also mean to affirm something. So if we're
Mhm.
saying, I can't do this, I will never be seen, I will never be loved, I am unworthy, those are all negative ways of pressing words into the psyche. But if we take that same concept and press positive words into the psyche, we can see it. They really do work. I mean, I'm
Mhm.
a great example in that small day case, but there have certainly been bigger times in life where much more important times where I had to cloak myself on the
Mhm.
outside with positive affirmations and feed myself on the inside with them to get through. Otherwise, we go into hopelessness. What do you think about that?
Yeah, definitely. I was kind of thinking about the listener's question again and thinking about how I feel like a lot of people in that situation, they get told like, "Oh, it'll get better, like you'll be fine and like you just have to get through it." And I think in a sense that's people giving you affirmation of like, oh, you're going to be fine, you're going to get through it. But I don't think it's as impactful as when you say it to yourself. I think people in those situations, like our listeners, it's kind of just like putting off like any kind of solution when you just tell someone, oh, it'll get better. You're going to be fine. Like just wait it out. It's like putting them in like such a weird waiting area of their life. And so I think if they could just use those positive affirmations for themselves, it's more of like an action, more of a way to take action, I think, in your own life than just have people spewing things at you, even though they're positive, even though they're good things to say. Oh, you'll get through it. You're going to be okay. It's not as helpful as when you say it to yourself, and then you can kind of take the action from that.
I 100% agree. I was thinking as you were saying that, that it's like you saying, Dr. Carla, I'm not strong enough. I'm not strong enough. And me saying, oh, you'll be fine. You'll be fine.
Mhm.
It'd be much better for the person who, like, for me to say, hey, why don't you lift some weights? If you're not feeling strong, let's get you to lift weights. And that's what affirmations do. I
Right.
believe. It's like weightlifting for the psyche. It's building that strength. It's saying,
Mhm.
I can do this. I can do this. I am good. I am strong. I am beautiful. Whatever it is, I really see affirmations as a practice of strengthening the self. And that inner strength is what gives rise to the hope.
Yeah, and that can be really powerful for queer people, especially to like know that you have control and to feel like you have power in the situation because in life you feel very powerless, you know?
Absolutely. And I know this isn't our topic for the day, but just before we start wrapping up, I'm curious, we're 100 years past the women's right to vote in America, and we've come a long way, but yet we haven't in many ways. And I know you're a big advocate of women's rights and feminism. What would you say for all of those women out there, all of those individuals out there who are feeling as if they can't break through the glass ceiling, or they're being treated unfairly, or they can never be pretty enough or thin enough, or whatever the societal norms are enough? Do you see your affirmations working for them as well?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think it applies to everyone, no matter what gender you are or orientation or anything. Positive affirmations can be really empowering for anyone who's struggling with kind of what you were describing, not really fitting into society or feeling frustrated with where society's at. Yeah, I think it's best to start kind of reframing how you think about yourself and decentering the negativity that society's giving us, you know?
I love that. Say more. Decentering the negativity that society is giving us.
Yeah, by that I just kind of mean like we live in a patriarchal society. So as a woman or a non-binary person or a trans person, we're being told things constantly that we're not good enough and we're never going to make it and all the things that you were describing, not being able to break through the glass ceiling. So if we kind of break that down for ourselves and understand where that's coming from, that it's coming from a negative place and a patriarchal place where it's not to our benefit and we decenter those ideas and we kind of start reframing that in our own brains and creating our own different mental environment like we were kind of talking about.
Mhm.
I think that can be really helpful and I think affirmations can really play a part in that.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And I think your book is a really lovely, not only book for the bedroom, for the office desk, for the coffee table, but I also think it's a great book where when kids are starting to get introduced to identity,
Mhm.
whatever that is, to sexuality, whatever that means to people. It's a lovely way to allow the idea of choice, healthy exposure. And I personally didn't grow up with anything like that. I grew up with my parents not allowing me into sex ed class because they were afraid I would learn something bad, right? And so we are either going to learn in healthy ways and be allowed to make our choices, we are going to learn, as I did, in perhaps not so healthy ways because we were put in a bubble.
Yeah.
And so I'm a big fan of not putting individuals in bubbles of let's hold hands, let's make friends, let's explore the world, let's do it in a healthy ways that allow people never to be pressured, but also never to be isolated or forced to hide who they are. Because I'm a believer we are all imperfect. None of us, I certainly will never be perfect.
Mhm.
And if we continue to lead with love, lead with acceptance, lead with kindness, lead with an open heart. And love is action. And so if we're telling people we love them, then we might want to look at how inclusive we're being, how
Yeah.
kind we're being, how
Mhm.
empowering we're being, because love is action.
Yeah, to kind
It's
of piggyback
imperfect.
off of that, I think a lot of people when it comes to learning about like queer identities and the queer community, they get kind of stressed out and they're like, I don't know where to start. I don't know what, I don't want to make any mistakes and all that kind of jazz. And I think it's important to kind of looking at the queer community with more compassion than like comprehension. Like you don't have to understand every single identity. You don't have to resonate with it. You don't have to fully get all the ins and outs of the queer community because it's just kind of impossible, but you do have to just lead with compassion for it, and you have to be curious about it, and you have to want to know what these people are going through. And yeah, so I would just say like compassion over comprehension about the queer community is really helpful.
Absolutely. And I'll add a little bit to that because I love the compassion piece, I think, and I love the curiosity. Curiosity is one of my favorite pieces. If you're respectfully curious,
Mhm.
that's very connective in many situations. And also, if we lean into one of my other favorite words is non-judgment.
Mm.
If we can, no matter how we were raised, many of us were raised in either really religious or really judgmental environments, we can learn to bracket that. We can learn to go, oh, I'm being a bit judgy here. We don't need to shame or blame ourselves. We just then get to take off the hat of judgment, put it over here, and keep doing that until we are really learning to embody love. Because true love, it doesn't always have to agree with somebody, but it can always allow, unless somebody's harming us, right? We can always allow for other perspectives and other ways of being. That's what love asks us to do.
Mhm.
So, Jess, you are a fabulous guest. I thoroughly have enjoyed our time together. Are there any other pieces you would like to cover?
No, I think we covered a pretty good amount. Thank you so much for having me. I've had a blast.
I have had so much fun with you. And the other piece that I want to say I'm ending and then I'm not, and I think of something you said, and you said that it can be difficult for people entering, and being curious about the queer community or any community. And in our world, we are very much sometimes afraid of getting it wrong and being censored or being told, oh, you know, you're a judgmental person when we're being curious, when we're learning. And I think that that sometimes I've been on that, like I said, when I went to that seminar, it was my first seminar on the queer community, and my eyes were going, wow, and it was ages ago, but my eyes were open and I was very curious. And fortunately, I was met with lots of acceptance and I've done lots of learning and growing, but we all have to start somewhere.
Mhm.
And especially for those who weren't raised, I think Gen Z has it much easier because there's, so much more readily available from the time they open their first books and the time they open their first computer. But for many people, it is new territory. And so, listeners, if you're in that group, remember you might feel a little anxious as you delve into it. You might feel a little trepidatious or worried, but it's okay because if you're exploring in a truly kind, compassionate, non judgmental way, you will learn as you grow, which is the purpose of life. We want to learn and expand.
Yeah, I would say it's important for those people to know that it's okay to be uncomfortable at first. Because whenever you're learning something new or there's things that you don't know, of course you're going to be kind of uncomfortable. But being uncomfortable in those spaces because you're uneducated about something, that's a privilege as well. So I think going into it knowing that is going to be really helpful to kind of break down those walls of anxiety about it because it's, you got to be comfortable getting uncomfortable to learn.
Yes, there is certainly a lot for us to learn and explore on the other side of fear, isn't
Mhm.
there? Well, Jess, thanks again. Where can our listeners find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram. I'm Jess Voss _art, or on my website, jessvossart.com.
Okay, listeners, I am going to spell Jess's name for you. It's Jess Vosseteig, Vosseteig. Her book, Affirmations for Queer People, 100 plus positive messages to affirm, empower, and inspire. And really, you ought to check out her website. So much glorious art, so much goodness going on there. And so thanks again, Jess.
Yeah, thank you so much.
My pleasure. And to our listeners, I so treasure you and feel so grateful to explore fresh and wonderful and beautiful topics with you. Thank you for joining us today. And this is Imperfect Love.
Thanks so much for sharing your time with me today. Remember, you have the power to transform your life and love fearlessly, if imperfectly, and it's my privilege to help you along the way. You can find more life-changing content, including my books and other podcast episodes, at drcarlamanley.com. Feel free to submit your own confidential questions through my website. I'll do my very best to include your issue on a future episode. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Until we connect again, this is Dr. Carla Marie Manley wishing you oceans of blessings and love. Please note, this podcast is psychoeducational in nature and is not intended to replace formal mental health support. Please contact your healthcare provider or emergency hotline if you need psychiatric care. And as always, please take good care of your amazing, wonderful self.